Hello and welcome to the Aviation Briefing with me, William Hallowell. In this podcast series, I speak with media and industry guests about the biggest stories and topics in aviation. Today, I'm joined by Ivan Stevenson, who is the curriculum lead for aviation management at Coventry University. And we're going to be talking about some breaking news this afternoon about a Singapore Airlines flight that's got caught up in some turbulence traveling from London to Singapore and has resulted in a number of people injured and sadly one person who has died as a result of the incident. Ivan, what do we know about this incident so far? It seems rapidly developing. We've got new information coming out, it seems, by the hour. Can you give us a bit of an up-to-speed kind of progress report?
Sure. Yeah, William, this is a really unfortunate incident. Actually, the aircraft seems to be, it's a Boeing 777-300, kind of the mainstay of the Singapore Airlines long-haul fleet. This is a regular flight between London Heathrow and Singapore. I understand that it departed Heathrow yesterday evening, arriving into Singapore in the early hours of what had been, I believe, that sort of the Singapore afternoon. I understand that breakfast had just been served, and the aircraft then hit some tropical storms, resulting in what would be classified as very severe turbulence. Passengers appear to have been thrown around the cabin, and as you say, yeah, at the moment we understand that one elderly, I think it's a 73-year-old UK passenger has died, and a number of other passengers are hospitalised. I believe a number of those injuries are quite severe. So yeah, it's a very unfortunate. I'd say that relatively rare that someone dies on board a turbulence event on an aircraft. Very, very rare indeed. But yeah, very, very unfortunate.
Yeah, the airline have said that it's obviously severe turbulence that has caused this incident. And as of recording at the moment, it's 3:10 in the afternoon UK time. So the latest information we have, the airline have said that there were a total of 211 passengers and 18 crew on board. So far, 18 people have been taken to hospital and another 12 have received treatment. As I say, that's of about 3 p.m. UK time.
Yeah.
Do we know much more about how severe this turbulence is, or in fact, what that actually means? Because, you know, people go on aircraft all the time. It's, you know, on the whole, much safer than I suppose the stigma might suggest. But, you know, turbulence is quite a normal thing. So what exactly could severe turbulence mean?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm in my late 40s. I've been flying for most of my life, and for a period of time, I flew very, very regularly. I was cabin crew for a time, and I would say that in my time of flying, I've only ever experienced what we classified as very mild turbulence, possibly an occasional moderate. But we're talking about here severe turbulence, which essentially means that passengers would be strained against their seats. Their seat belts, it would be very, very uncomfortable, and anyone which was not secured down, or anything that was not secured down in the cabin, would move around very, very violently. Moderate turbulence is possibly even not so mild turbulence is possibly barely noticeable by passengers that move at the front of the aircraft. At the back of the aircraft, where it tends to move around a little bit more, you might get a little bit of shuddering, a bit of bump. Moderate turbulence would require cabin crew to be seated. You would probably see the seatbelt signs go on in moderate turbulence, and that would probably require the suspension of hot drinks, maybe even a full the trolleys may need to be stowed in moderate turbulence. Severe turbulence is I want to say it's an emergency, but it would require a very urgent kind of cabin crew be seated, seatbelt signs on, everything to be stowed. There may not be time, possibly in a severe turbulence episode, where it happens very quickly and unexpectedly. I think we call it clear air turbulence. It's not expected, and it would seem that this is possibly one of those. I think a passenger on board has described the moment where the aircraft has pitched up, and then obviously it has kind of come down again. I think there's a bit of a myth about turbulence. People often talk about air pockets. It's a bit of a meaningless concept, actually, an air pocket. You don't suddenly fly through there and suddenly find a place where there is no air. What you've really got, I'm not a fluid dynamicist, but what you have in turbulence is essentially areas of fluid, and and it kind of rolls around like water, like the waves on the sea. And obviously you have got very light swell, moderate swell, and severe swell. It's a little bit like that. And what this passenger has described is the aircraft kind of rising up on the crest of the wave. And then what passengers experience as turbulence is when you kind of come down the other side of the wave and you kind of return to what would essentially be your normal sort of cruising level. So it's not that the aircraft falls per se, it's kind of rising on a crest of air and then it's kind of resettling down again to where it should be. But that can be quite violent. And that appears to be what has happened here. And potentially flying through a tropical storm, you may have the aircraft may have experienced numerous swells of severe turbulence. And as we have seen, obviously in this case, it has resulted in very unfortunate outcomes.
Obviously, the aircraft made an emergency landing in Bangkok around 3:45 p.m. Local time, I believe. In your view or in your experience, obviously you were former cabin crew. What's the protocol in this situation? As you say, one student on board the flight told Reuters that suddenly the aircraft started tilting up and there was shaking. He started bracing. There was a very dramatic drop, and people who didn't have their seatbelts on, they hit their heads and resulted in dents in some instances, dents in the cabin, overhead cabin areas. That's obviously quite severe. And, I suppose safety for passengers and everybody on board is kind of crucial. It's kind of central to this incident, isn't it, really? Because, again, lots of people get on aircraft and, when we're flying, we're told that there is turbulence. We need to put our seatbelts on. And, a lot of passengers don't because they think they're uncomfortable. They don't feel like doing it for whatever reason. And obviously, this is a bit of a wake-up call, isn't it, to not just safety procedure for crews, cabin crews, but also passengers themselves.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'd say I've never experienced severe turbulence, but I have operated on flights where seatbelts have been on for most of the flight. And I think there's a number of key points. The other part of my job I have done in the past is manage cabin crew. And what I have seen is cabin crew who've been injured as a result of turbulence. And actually, that is much more common. The cabin crew themselves are at much more risk during turbulence than passengers are themselves. As you've correctly pointed out, the instruction is there often as part of the safety briefing, or it's made as part of the in-flight announcements to, the seatbelt sign may be turned off, but, you should retain or keep it lightly fastened in case of any unexpected turbulence. A lot of passengers either don't do that, and in some cases, passengers either just flatly ignore cabin or instructions in the cabin because they just don't think that it's dangerous. They don't understand. They may have never experienced anything that requires them to, be secured. But I have, in my experience, witnessed passengers who either have refused to comply or who have, complied. I actually observe it as a passenger occasionally flying where someone will unfasten their seatbelt after, a cabin check. It's because they, as you say, find it uncomfortable. And in most cases, nothing happens. But should the aircraft hit, usually on landing, maybe a hard landing or a sudden acceleration, a deceleration or a takeoff and a go around, then you may find that people can move around the cabin quite quickly and unexpectedly. And it is it's just a case of following, instructions. But as I say, it's more likely in these circumstances that cabin crew actually are injured. Now, we don't know yet what the outcomes or exactly who. We understand that it's passengers. We don't know if the airline would give a breakdown if cabin crew were injured. But I've certainly managed cabin crew in the past who have been injured during turbulence incidents, often back injuries, neck injuries, and sometimes to the point where they require significant time off work. And that's because in an emergency, the cabin crew are there primarily for your safety, not just your comfort, and as well as kind of monitoring the safety in the cabin. In an emergency, they may be required to walk around and attend to injured passengers. So we don't know the details of what's happened on board this aircraft yet. I can assume that the aircraft will need, that the cabin will need to have been secured for landing. If passengers have been thrown around the cabin, they will need to be secured for landing. that could result in some very difficult operating environment for the cabin crew. So it's, it'll be interesting potentially to see what evolves from this. There will possibly need to be an investigation into what has happened, how it was managed, etc. And we'll see what happens. But yeah, very unfortunate, very sad outcome. But it's a warning, really, that aircraft, flying is safe. This is very rare. But yeah, follow the onboard instructions and keep your seatbelt fastened when you're seated.
So it may be a bit early to speculate. You kind of suggested there that there might be an investigation into the management of the incident from the crew. Only a few months ago, there was the Japan Airlines incident in Japan. The crew were very much applauded for their handling of the situation and the evacuation that they led of the passengers on the tarmac. So in terms of going back to procedures, in terms of what might change or what could come of the incident, I mean, what is the likely result for the way that passenger safety is managed by crews in future?
I mean, Singapore Airlines are one of the world's most highly respected airlines. They have an excellent, outstanding safety record. It's interesting, actually, when you start kind of Googling around this incident, you will find that Singapore Airlines comes up, a couple of times. There was an incident, I think, back in 2013. There's lots of imagery of what happened inside the aircraft and that. So, but in terms of where Singapore Airlines operate, they operate into a very hot tropical area of the world. It's like this year round. So they deal with these kind of operating conditions, if you like, that results potentially in turbulence. So it's quite possible that they come across this more often than maybe some other airlines do. I don't anticipate actually that anything has gone wrong here in terms of the management of the incident. I don't anticipate that anything has gone wrong in terms of how the crew have handled it. I suspect, knowing that the reputation and having flown with them, actually, I expect the crew will have handled this in an exceptionally professional and highly appropriate way, as they are trained to do. As I say, one of the world's most highly respected airlines, and their operational standards are very, very well respected and highly regarded. So yeah, I don't anticipate necessarily anything coming off this. Actually, it's worth potentially pointing out, I mean, we've obviously got a fatality here. We've got a number of passengers hospitalized, but I think it was 12 to 18 passengers in hospital out of an aircraft carrying over 200 passengers in a severe turbulence incident. It's arguably we're lucky that it's maybe so few. There are instances actually where more people have been injured. So again, there's the need here to keep it in context and keep it in scale. There is some emerging kind of data over recent years that suggests that turbulence incidents may increase in certain parts of the world over the next kind of 20 to 30 years because of climate change, which can result obviously in changing weather patterns and more turbulent air on certain parts of the world. There is some conversation emerging about the possibility of airlines altering their route planning, possibly, but that is still an emerging issue. But as I say, let's keep this in context. It seems it's been well managed, and I don't necessarily anticipate anything coming out of it that will cause for particular concern.
Going back to the passengers who were on board the flight, so far, the authorities in Bangkok have said that the deceased man likely died due to a heart attack. That's what we know so far. Not much more information has come out of that. Obviously, so management may not play a part in this, but it was a Boeing 777, and Boeing have had their issues in the last few months. It's had a very huge impact on the airline industry and the aviation industry as a whole. The fact that it was a Boeing 777, has that got any part to play in this incident, or is that just pure speculation and perhaps, just going way off topic?
I think that is, as you suggest, it's probably a diversion. It'll be interesting to see how this emerges in the media. I think we've seen this over the last few weeks. Actually, every time there's any kind of incident with a Boeing aircraft, regardless of what it is, oh, there's a Boeing aircraft that's had an incident, and the assumption is that it's all somehow connected into those issues that, yeah, as you say, we've discussed in the past. I really don't think that at all. The Boeing 777 is, I think it is probably one of it's probably one of the safest aircraft in the world. If I had to choose a long-haul aircraft to fly on in terms of its safety record, I'd probably choose the Boeing 777. It's if you look how long the aircraft in its iterations from its launch, gosh, we're looking at what, 30 years ago. Up until its most recent, incarnation, and of course it's subject to ongoing development. We're looking at the emergence of the 777X. It's an exceptionally safe aircraft, and actually an awful lot of these issues come down to how airlines manage and maintain their fleet. And as I say, Singapore Airlines are one of the world's most highly regarded in every respect in terms of safety management. So no, in fact, I would say very possibly maybe the alternate is the case here, where actually maybe the aircraft actually is maybe what has resulted in the outcome that we have with maybe so few injuries. The aircraft is very robust and very reliable and very, very capable of dealing with probably any kind of turbulence that would be thrown at it. So no, I don't think there's anything here at all. One thing I would possibly observe, I mean, the passenger, we don't know the circumstances, but I mean, if they're suggesting that it was a heart attack, the passenger may have been in their seat, and possibly it's just the awful experience of severe turbulence that resulted in just being unable to cope physically with the experience. I have no doubt that what has happened would be frightening. As I say, I've never experienced severe turbulence, but I have, as I say, come across crew who have, and it is an unsettling experience. I think it features very highly in people's fears around flying. Turbulence is an unsettling experience. So, it'll be. I'm sure that more stories will emerge from passengers over the coming days about what has happened. But as I say, keeping it in context, I think, is really what's most important around this.
Looking forward, then, you've hinted that there will be an impending investigation. I'm sure there will be. In terms of what could possibly come out in the next few days or weeks, obviously, like I say, this afternoon, it's been a very rapidly developing story. We've had lots of kind of new information coming out in short, sharp bursts. As the incident has unfolded and we learn more, I mean, what can we expect to find out, and what can people, what can we learn as an industry about this incident as well?
I think, as I mentioned already, we are seeing emerging sort of discourse and suggestion that that turbulence will become more frequent, or severe turbulence, or increasing severity of turbulence will become more regular as climate change accelerates. And we're looking at, airlines are talking about the impact this will have in terms of flight planning. So I think that there's the potential here for maybe to look at that in terms of how we plan our routes are planned, also in terms of forecasting, but also the use of increasing technology in terms of flight planning, the use of artificial intelligence to model where we might see particular types of weather patterns that may require particular flight planning, route diversions, etc. You may see acceleration of this in combination of these factors all coming together. And it's that kind of thing, very possibly, that might focus on any kind of investigation or analysis that emerges from this. What that might look like, I don't know. It's interesting, though, when you do look at the flight plan that the aircraft has taken today, because it has had to skirt around airspace. For example, it had to fly around the border of Afghanistan and then down the side. So it was a diversion around there, and then it was heading down over India, over sort of the north of the Bay of Bengal. That area is notorious for tropical storms, and it may be that it's very difficult for the aircraft to flight plan around them. But as I say, we don't know. It does seem that it's something that was very, very sudden and possibly unexpected to a degree. It will be interesting to see. But I think there is, the future of flight planning is something that is going to kind of emerge probably quite quickly over the coming years, as we start to look at advanced modelling and techniques to kind of evolve that and see how we can improve it.
Well, look, Ivan Stevenson, thank you very much for joining me on the aviation briefing this afternoon. I'm sure as we hear more information, I might have to come back to you for a further reaction, but it's been great to have you on the podcast again. So thank you very much again for joining me.